Hello, welcome to this new session on Ingress controllers. So what we're going to look at today is a way to simplify our architecture and infrastructure regarding Kubernetes and how we route traffic to the pods and to deployments. So what I've done here is I've created a really simple schematic here. And if we look at just the first diagram, basically on the kind of on-prem, this is typically what people would actually have to do if they were away from the cloud, but they were simply on-prem. They really have a kind of cluster deployment, and they'd have a few pods. They'd have to expose some port and IP, and then they probably have to point their DNS settings over to that IP and port, so that the end users can basically access the service. So when you kind of bring it over to the cloud version, um, you can typically sort of see that again, it's the same type of scenario where you actually have a deployment. Um, Now, in this scenario here, what I'm just basically trying to do is I'm just trying to basically highlight for my own exam study here of what I'm trying to represent in my notes here. So again, this is not a production architecture diagram that would be ready for presenting, but it's really just myself trying to kind of whiteboard out what I'm trying to envision would be the end kind of product here. So really what I'm sort of saying is, okay, so you have multiple kind of scenarios here that you could basically do. So you have your end users, and they're probably hitting a network load balancer, which is going to an internal load balancer into your Kubernetes cluster. And the point is that what you're trying to do here is, if you scale multiple deployments, so if you kind of have this deployment and you have this deployment, you know, you're going to basically have to be managing multiple network load balancers and multiple load balancers plus node ports for each of those deployments. And load balancers in the cloud world, they are expensive and they do have a cost. So what you're trying to do here with the Ingress controllers is really sort of say, allow one Kubernetes object that can basically um, route to multiple services if it requires route to multiple endpoints, but basically, get to the end deployments, which have basically multiple and different pods behind each of those deployments. So that's simply what I'm trying to do here, is just kind of represent um, that kind of working. So if I kind of went up to my notes here, and you can sort of see I'm in the series 2 for Kubernetes. I go down to my new notes here for Ingress controllers. So it's 2.3 is what we're basically working on today. And you can sort of see, I've put some notes about, Ingress controllers in general. Obviously read up about, Ingress controllers, from their first resource, which is always your Kubernetes documentation, because that's where your exam would basically be, focused. So just make sure that you basically do read up on um, those controllers inside of the actual Kubernetes documentation. But there's so many resources out there that have basically explained this, in different ways. But the theory always kind of comes back to, this type of trying to simplify, remove multiple network load balancers and multiple ports, and basically having a more simplified structure in one place, so that you can basically maintain that much easier inside of your Kubernetes cluster yourself. Um, so I'm not going to kind of explain too much further kind of about that, but that's what we're typically trying to understand and learn for the exam. So in this case, I just wanted to show you that, when you actually stood up your Kubernetes cluster. So when I stood up my Kubernetes cluster here, one thing that I actually had to do, different from previously, was I had to set up the actual ingress. And basically, you can sort of see here, these are the exact same notes that we've kind of had for the previous sessions. And I would have done this command here to create my Kubernetes engine cluster. But on this one here, I had to also kind of install the actual ingress setup. So you can read much more about that kind of setup from here. But I really had to kind of just do kind of two extra steps, and then I just had to actually make sure that my Nginx deployment was ready. So if I basically just have a look quickly at my pods, you can see that I basically have one Ingress Nginx controller pod, which is basically running here, and this is a new cluster that I kind of set up a few hours ago. But this is the type of scenario that you're looking to actually have available before you actually start the exercises. So now I want to get into the actual exercises themselves. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go back to my documentation here, and I want to just kind of highlight quickly that, as you read through the documentation, there's actually different types of Ingress controllers that you can basically set up. And some of them do get kind of quite complicated, you know. Some of them are what they would call or refer to as kind of basic controllers. But you can sort of see types of controllers here in Ingress backed by a single service. You can sort of see a simple fan out, and the Kubernetes documentation again does great illustrations here to actually try and understand, and try and learn what's the kind of difference between like a simple Ingress which is backed by a single service versus like a single fan out type scenario. So you can sort of see here in this case, the fan out basically has two services, two different ports, multiple ports running behind that service and multiple ports running behind this service. But the one ingress here is basically controlling that, and that kind of mirrors what we've been kind of referred to in this simple diagram. So, try and kind of understand those, try and learn those, look at the actual different examples. And if you kind of go back to the notes here, you can sort of see that, okay, the first thing I'm going to actually do here is I'm actually going to create like a really kind of simple um, version of this. So I'm going to just create, a simple kind of namespace here, and I'm going to create a hello world application. So I'm going to just put that here. And you can sort of see that that has now actually been created, and I'm going to move this over here so it's just a bit easier. And the next thing I want to do is I obviously want to expose my deployment using a node port cluster, because Ingress controllers are really built around node ports. And if I sort of say here, if I can sort of say, I can look at my actual service, you can sort of see that I actually have a service that's a node port and it has a cluster IP, and there's no external IP right now, but I do know that there's an actual port that's exposing the service on this node port behind. So what I want to do now is I want to run my little command here to create my Ingress controller. And as you can sort of see, this is exactly representing what I actually have here. So I've done this previously, obviously, to make sure that this works. You can sort of see here that it's a type Ingress. It's in the API for networking. It's got a name. It's got in the specific namespace that I'm working in. It's got a path. So basically, so saying anything at the root of this service will be available. And it's got an actual service name that it's looking for, and this was the service name that we provided previously, and this was the port that we provided previously and set up previously. So what I want to do now is I actually want to apply that. So I'm going to come out of that, and I'm going to apply that, and that's now been created. And then I want to sort of say I want to get my ingress here, and I want to make sure that this is actually just being created in the correct namespace. So I can sort of see that it actually has, okay. So, and it's basically available kind of, 9 seconds. Now, one thing when you're kind of working with Ingress, and again, we're studying for an exam here. So, this is not me, teaching you completely everything about Ingress. Obviously you have to go and do your own research, and there's some fantastic courses out there about Ingress controllers. I'm just trying to study for the actual exam itself, so I'm just trying to work through the actual potential exam questions that could come up on Ingress. So the first thing I really have to do, to have that is, start to create some Ingress and see if I can, route traffic using the Ingress. But you'll basically sort of see here, if you look at the actual events here, this is an actual important scenario, because if you actually look at the events here, you can basically sort of see that this Ingress controller that I just created a few moments ago, this is actually scheduled for sync, which basically means that it's getting ready, it's getting ready to provide me an IP in the Kubernetes engine that will allow me access into this endpoint. So if we kind of go back up here to our Ingress, I mean our Ingress here is basically going to provide us an IP that our users will be able to access. Now, in an ideal world, obviously we're studying for an exam here, so I'm just doing the kind of most basic scenario of that. I just want to sort of see an IP and I want to be able to access my deployment, but you wouldn't be providing an IP to the end users. But for the exam, what we're trying to do is just make sure that we can learn, how can we get an ingress into the YAML file, how can we apply that YAML file, how can we get the ingress, and how can we actually describe it, all of those type of scenarios of where that could potentially come up in exam. So if I kind of just describe my ingress again, you can sort of see that now I actually have an IP is actually assigned for my load balancer controller. So you can actually sort of see that I actually have an IP that's actually been assigned. So you could sort of see before, we basically had like it was scheduled for sync, and now I actually have an IP that's basically being provided. Now, if I was to go in and change this Ingress controller. Basically, what I've noticed is in Kubernetes engine, what happens is it basically just actually update the URL map. So if I kind of change this, this path here, for example, to be /hello, for example, if I wanted the end users to go to /hello, it would basically just update the URL path, so it wouldn't recreate everything. So it definitely is an awful lot quicker than having to set up all of this type of scenario, because really what you're doing is you're just kind of coming onto um, this line here, and you're kind of removing these kind of lines here and the requirement for these lines. But if I kind of sort of say, okay, so now I actually have an IP, and if I kind of go back to my notes, and you can sort of see, okay, so the next thing I really need to do is actually right now is actually I just want to actually I want to run this into my my IP into my browser. Now it will take a few moments, so it does actually take a few moments to kind of come up. But basically, I'm going to pause the video just while I wait for that to actually set up. Okay, so it took a minute or two for the actual service endpoint to come up, but you can actually sort of see that at the IP here, you can see that I actually have a hello world with version, and that is the actual host name of the pod that this was actually saved from. So you can sort of see if I'm clicking around here, I'm going to the other pods. But the kind of point here is that, it took a couple of moments for that to kind of come up. It wasn't completely instant, but it still means that I now have, kind of one place um, into my diagram where I can actually configure and change, and this Ingress controller, because it's a type 7 load balancer, it's part of my Kubernetes cluster, and it's available for me to configure, and I don't have to go to external teams to ask them to change the network load balancer, change the internal load balancer or anything like that. So I can kind of configure all of these kind of URLs myself, and I can update these with my deployment team. So that's very positive. So if I kind of come down here, and I can also do a kind of a busybox temporary pod, and I can just run that, and you'll sort of see that I get the same actual response, because the service at the end point is really kind of hello world. But the point is that I can also sort of see that the service is listening, it's up and running. This is version, this is question one, like as a basic Ingress controller. But really, when you kind of come down to slightly more complicated deployments, so here's a sample of where I would basically do, the same type of scenario. So, I mean, I could actually go ahead and actually do this and sort of say, okay, so I want the same type of services, I want the same type of deployment, but this time I'm going to actually just kind of make it into the YAML file, just to make sure that I can configure the service an awful lot better. I can expose it, and I can create another basic service, and I can create this basic ingress here. And really what I'm sort of saying is, I'm going to be basically doing the same as I kind of did in the previous steps, just a little bit more kind of flushed out. So really would have the same effect because you really just have kind of one IP and one service, same as we did in the previous example. But it's just a little bit kind of more flushed out, and it's just really about me trying to understand and learn from the exam. Um, to make sure that, I understand what an actual ingress controller is, how to create a basic ingress controller. And then I can kind of come down to question 3, which is, where we saw here, kind of going back to the kind of, the fan out version of the ingress controller. And that's something, I could sort of say here, um, I can again kind of create my namespace, and here it's not essentially, it's not essential that I would actually have to create a namespace. I just kind of do this just to kind of keep the running components away from each other. But it's not critically essential that you do that. But I think it's kind of for me when I'm kind of studying for my exam, I like to kind of do that, and I do kind of name them. Kind of appropriately as well. But here I could create another deployment. I could create another deployment to create, and this time you sort of see, you're actually creating a second deployment here. So you have another deployment. So you have your first deployment, which kind of goes back to, this one here, and then you basically have a second deployment, which kind of goes back to this one here. And again, these diagrams are not intended to be, production ready, but they're just meant to be kind of whiteboarding. And I create that kind of second deployment, and then I basically would create my ingress. And here, here's the kind of big difference between the fan out and the single version, in that now I basically have 2 points of entry into my ingress, but it's typically the same type of ingress controller. It just actually has 2 points of interest that would be basically available. This one here says I make sure I go to V1. This one here says I make to go to V2. So this is the service for Web 1, and this is the service for Web 2. And you can sort of see here, when you kind of, again, you get the same type of scenario where you basically get your V1 with your IP, and you'll sort of see, okay, so I said in your browser this is V1, and then basically in your second deployment, when you run your V2, you also get your V2. So you can sort of see that the traffic here from the deployment 1, from the deployment 2, they're all actually going up into your kind of service and then into your ingress. And your ingress here is actually controlling everything that's actually available endpoint wise to your deployments, which just really kind of simplifies your infrastructure an awful lot. And then there's a fourth example here called name-based routing, and you can basically kind of go down here, and you can sort of see this is about like name-based virtual hosting, and you can sort of see here, so you have your client, you have your ingress managed, and you have your ingress again, and here you're sort of saying, okay, so I basically have multiple host names at the same IP address. So I have multiple host names behind my ingress, and they're basically going to this service for service 1, and they're going to this service for service 2. So I'm sure that as people sort of see this, there's many ideas and potential solutions that this would resolve for them. But again, right now what we're trying to do is make sure that we understand for the exam, that if a question came up on host-based routing ingress controller, I could find this scenario in the notes here, and make sure that I've done this once or twice, and make sure that I understand the host-based routing, because this scenario here is technically exactly the same. Setting up 2 deployments. The only thing you're really doing here is creating a kind of host called test1, creating a host called test2, and then basically just making sure that this first one here is going to the web 1. Obviously this one is actually going to the web 2, and that's really the same idea that you've kind of done in the previous examples. It's just a little bit, a little step kind of further than before, but the same idea is, you need some deployment, you need some service, you basically need some Ingress controller that will basically route to the multiple endpoints. And you could make this an improved um, setup here by kind of adding other endpoints, and trying it in your own environment to sort of play around and make sure that you can actually get to those endpoints. Because really all you'd actually have to do is kind of just put like a v1 in front of this, um, plus a v2 at the end of this. So it makes kind of life an awful lot easier. And that's about Ingress controllers, and I'll see you in the next session. Thank you.